please start the recording? There it is. Okay. The recording has been started. It is now 10:30 a.m. and I would like to call to order this meeting of the WIFA Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee. I will call the roll. Buchanan Davis. Present. Patrice Horseman.
Present.
Pete Kim.
Pete is present. He is currently rejoining as a panelist.
Okay. Drew John.
Here.
Tim Tomier.
Here.
Beckham. We don't expect him.
We do not.
And myself, Ted Cook. So we have 6 members present. Quorum is confirmed, assuming Pete will be joining us.
He's good.
For the record, please remember to identify yourselves when making a motion or requesting to speak. Please ensure that you are unmuted for any votes. And for those in the room, please remember to leave microphones on the table for sound quality purposes. In addition, if any member wishes to depart the meeting at any time, please announce your departure for our recorded meeting records. I know that a couple of members have got a hard stop at noon. I expect we'll be done before then. Let's move to agenda item number 2, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Has the WIFA staff received any disclosure?
Good morning, Joe Satelli, General Counsel. No disclosures have been submitted for today's meeting.
Thank you. If any member would like to identify and disclose a conflict for any agenda item on today's agenda, they may do so at this time. Seeing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, the director's report. Director McGuire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of updates for this committee regarding the long-term water augmentation importation process. The rest of this meeting will be talking about our in-state, but wanted to give you a quick state of play of where we are. So if you go to the next slide, you've seen this flow chart before. This is the process and cadence for the approval of task orders. So we have said before, we will say again, it will be the board's job to approve each of these task orders as a cost control mechanism. We will not spend money without your approval. The task orders are what authorize us to spend money on the teams. Therefore, you will have a very active role in developing those. There will be a 2-step, I know there are 7 boxes on this slide, but think of this as a 2-step process for the actual approval of the content of those task orders. Step 1 is the committee. The committee will approve the scope of work. Think of that as the outline for the task orders that teams will then fill in. Once the teams have filled in those outlines with the detailed scoping descriptions, the detailed deliverables, that detailed outline will be approved by the board. So it does 2 steps. The committee gets to sort of put their stamp on the overarching, this is the big picture of what we want to see. The board then approves the details of that. Just like we're at a kiosk at the mall, I've put a star indicating where we are in this map, and we're between steps 1 and 2. We have drafted those scopes of work for the developers. We're communicating with developers actively regarding those scopes of work pursuant to Task Order 0, which you approved earlier this year. We will be providing those scopes of work to this committee for review within the next couple of days. So Ben, if you will go to the next slide, this is what I expect. This is tentative, but this is what we have built into the schedule, that on April 1st, this committee will engage in initial review of tasks 1 through 4. That's all of the tasks except for the financial scoping task. Because we've just brought on EY as our advisor, we're still working on getting that task 4 outline, so that may kind of run on a parallel process, but I think we'll be able to catch that up. So on April 1st will be that initial review, and these truly are outlines. You're going to see 4 pages, 5 pages for each task order. What we'll want from this committee is your knee-jerk reactions to, is this what you expected to see? What have we missed? What do you want to make sure is encapsulated within these reviews, or within these outlines? On April 9th, you'll do the initial review of the Task 5 scope of work, that Task 5 outline with the financials. Again, this is tentative, but we think we can keep this. We think we can make that deadline. And then your secondary review of Tasks 1 through 4, which will be a review of those as they are updated, both to reflect the comments that we received from you earlier in April, comments that we're receiving from the teams themselves, from the developers, to make sure that by the time we get that outline to the developers, approved, it is exactly what all of us need it to be, want it to be, to effectively develop those tasks 1 through 5. And then that actual approval of the tasks would happen on April 15th following our regularly scheduled board meeting. We would have this committee meet again for that. It's tentative, but that is the cadence that I anticipate for our review of those tasks, which are very important that we get those as close to right as we possibly can before we go forward. We can make adjustments, but we obviously want to set expectations early on so that everybody knows what is expected, when those things are expected, and you have a very good idea of what we can look for in terms of deliverables and timing from the development team. Questions on that?
Can I interrupt for just 1 second?
Yes.
So understanding that this is tentative with respect to timing and which items we'll be reviewing. So should this committee expect to meet 3 times?
Yes, it should.
Okay, all right, just wanted to make that clear before we get to the end of the meeting and everybody's thinking about what they're doing next while we're having our discussion about future meetings. April 15th is our next board meeting,
Yep.
so that would be a logical time to have a committee meeting, but around April 1st and around April 9th,
That's right.
probably have committee meetings as well.
Yep, so I'll be asking Brenda to poll for availability on those weeks, and we'll see what works, and we can adjust as necessary. So just think of it as kind of week of April 1st, week of April 9th, but then the 15th, definitely expect to spend all day here between the board meeting and this committee meeting. If no other questions, Mr. Chair, that concludes my director's report at this time.
Okay. Before we move on to the regular agenda, I would like to remind members of the public who wish to speak on a specific item may submit a speaker's card prior to the chair opening discussion on that item. For instructions on how to submit a speaker's card, please refer to the notes on proceedings section of today's meeting agenda. So with that, we will move to our regular agenda. Item number 4, next steps for the in-state Augmentation Financial Assistance Program, and Director McGuire will lead that discussion.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chair. And Ben, you can go over to the next slide. Today's discussion, committee members, is very much that. We're not really asking you to make specific decisions for us. We are asking for some direction in terms of what we bring to the board of directors at its next meeting. But we wanted to give you the opportunity to have a little more of a conversation regarding the 2 applications that are in front of you, but less the details of those and more what do they mean for the future of this fund. So we had part of that discussion last month as we talked about these applications specifically. You made your ranking, Queen Creek number 1, Surprise number 2, and that is it's a good ranking. It should hold, and I am going to reiterate multiple times during this meeting that I think it would be a wise decision for the committee to bring that to the board next month for decision, right? Let's start the ball rolling with the applications that are in front of us. But there were some very good questions from the committee about what that means for the future of the fund and what a commitment to one or both of these applications, one or both of these projects would mean for how the fund revolves, how much money we have available for future projects and other kinds of projects. So I think it was wise of this committee to want to have some of those discussions before we do recommend to the board, or you do recommend to the board what you ultimately want to do with these applications. As we reviewed the committee's discussion from last month, we kind of sussed out 2 specific questions that we thought came out of that conversation. The first question is regarding the revolving nature of the fund, or maybe a better way to say that is the self-sustaining nature of the fund. And it really boiled down to how we balance today's needs, the borrowers that are in front of us, with the expected needs of tomorrow, the expected needs of the fund overall, and wanting this to be something that is self-sustaining, which I think was very clear from the committee's discussion that that's what you want. We want this to be something that has longevity, that works a lot like our state revolving funds, and that it is a predictable and fulsome opportunity for water providers to find the funding for the infrastructure that they need. So how do we do that, understanding that we know what we have in front of us, we don't know what's coming into the future, but we want to be able to be responsive to what's coming in the future. The second question that this committee had was similar but different, and it's how do we commit to projects like the Bartlett project that have a much longer time frame, that we still think have a lot of merit, that we still think meet a need that is out there, that meets a need that is useful for WIFA to meet, but not then prohibit ourselves from lending to projects that have a shorter time frame, that need the money tomorrow, that need the money next month as opposed to several years from now. So we're going to handle both of those questions in turn. And for this next slide, I'm going to throw it over to Denise to do more of the discussion regarding how this fund could revolve, what that looks like. But more importantly, I think for today's discussion, what information do we not have that we could get that help us understand what a revolving self-sustaining fund could look like? So with that, I'll have Ben go to the next slide and I'll turn over the mic to Denise.
Thank you. So, we are used to at WIFA a very mature revolving fund, right? So now we have to change gears. We're starting a new revolving fund. So to start a new revolving fund, we do have an opportunity because we have, I'm going to say 90 million, and the way I look at that is seed money, right? So this is money that we can use to begin this program. And so what we're proposing is that we have a loan. We have a loan that's a high quality borrower. We also have a loan where we know that the disbursement of those funds will be fairly quick, within probably 6 months, most likely July. So that'll solidify the loan, and we will receive a P&I payment from that loan. So this is a very good first start to a revolving loan program. Once we go beyond that $90 million of that initial seed money, we need to really look at any financial assistance we provide to our applicants based on their credit. Now, if we do this one at a time, I will have to leverage against one individual borrower at a time. And we can do that. But what may make more sense is if we can really define what the population is out there and what the needs are out there. And maybe we can put together a portfolio of multiple applicants. As Mr. Cook said earlier, there's lots of people doing the same type of projects. So can we identify those people, put together a stronger portfolio that's more diverse, has multiple borrowers, good credit ratings, different pots of money, different projects. If we bunch that together, we can put together a stronger portfolio, which will allow us to offer a better package to our borrowers and allow us to borrow at a cheaper rate. So we really need to get all of this information so that we can figure out how much can we afford, right? Because I can't tell you right now how much we can afford. The only thing I can tell you is if we base that on one additional loan for surprise. It would be more beneficial, I think, to the committee to take a broader perspective and say how much can we afford if we have a portfolio of borrowers and what that would look like and how we could leverage those funds. Now, again, this is nothing new. All SRF funds have to start off this way. And so we're willing to talk to experts in the industry to make sure we're taking each step very calculated and making sure that we've got a lot of flexibility here with WIFA and how we best utilize these funds. But I think it really behooves us to gather more information and make incremental decision making so that we make the best decisions both for our applicants and for WIFA in the long run and for the program.
Questions, comments for Denise based on that discussion?
Members?
Yeah.
Somebody made a noise. Is that a hand up?
Pete.
Pete, please.
It's kind of chicken and the egg, isn't it?
Yes.
Right? Kind of got to get more information. We do, like, what would you suggest is the right sort of like, we do want this to revolve, I think. There's absolutely those types of things, but the parameters in order to like even do the fundamental preliminary model like relies upon a lot of things that we just don't know, if I'm understanding you correctly. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, I will tell you I tried to model it, but I found myself making stuff up.
Well, and
Right.
I think, Pete, that actually goes, it's a perfect segue into kind of the next slide and our next recommendation for the committee, which is how do we find some of those unknowns? How do we gather some of that information? We have limited tools available to us to do that, but I think the easiest way to do it is by asking potential borrowers. And so that would look like opening a second financial assistance cycle, basically identical to this first cycle, but with a longer application window, right? So when we went out and we did the demand scoping for this current cycle, it was extremely compressed. and we did sort of a shotgun approach of outreach to potential water providers. We had a lot of interest, but we also had a lot of people saying, there's no way I can get this application together in time, that I can get the authorization from my governing bodies in time. This is interesting, but just the timing does not work. So let's change that. Let's fix that, make it so that there's a longer application window. And we can use this as really it's a demand scoping for what our borrower portfolio might look like and what the projects might look like. It allows us to get eliminate some of that chicken and egg, right? Because we're actually getting better information about what we would be working with, which helps us make some of the decisions about what is the best way to leverage, what is the timing of that. Honestly, how much do we have to provide in this second funding cycle? We won't really know a good answer to that if we open it, but we can work with borrowers, we can communicate with borrowers to explain that we need their information before we have more of our information. It creates a much more open window and open level of communication. Pete has his hand up.
Pete has his hand up again.
Pete has his hand up again. We need more information, very obviously. What I see here is reopen applications in order to gather that information. I wonder if there's something faster, right? It's a lot of work to apply for these things. To the earlier comments, you have to go get approval. You have to go get this. You have to get the paperwork. You have to have, and so I think that is there something shorter that we can do? A pulse check, a survey, something that's a little bit lighter weight than an application. Yes, it won't quite be as cut and dry as an application. Like, we're definitely going to apply for this because we just did. On the other hand, like, if we need the information faster, then perhaps we could do something a little bit more lightweight or just in the name of getting something done quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other committee members? Well, in Pete, I think that's a dilemma as far as do we collect the information that we need as part of a financial assistance cycle, or do we do something different, like a survey or something like that? I'd like to float the idea of maybe something in between that would not be doing two things. In other words, a survey and then a funding cycle or funding cycles. What did we learn from our initial funding cycle? We had 2 applicants, one with an almost immediate need as far as financing goes, immediate in that frame of reference, and one with a much longer. With, I think, nobody came and told us this, but with, I think, the realization on our part that we are likely to have other folks with the same type of need come to us. And one of the difficulties that we had, besides not having enough money to fund both of our 2 applications at the same time, was exactly that we had one with an almost immediate need and one with a little bit further out need. I think, speaking for myself, but I think other folks have got the same point of view, is that even if, let's say, we had $200 million rather than 90, and it was possible to fund both of them in this initial funding cycle, I had, and I think others had, some discomfort with the idea of obligating funds to a borrower that would not actually draw on those funds for years, 4 or 5 years possibly, and leaving that fund obligated but unable to revolve because it had not yet been funded. And if we are of the mindset that we whatever else we might have, we are likely to have others, applicants, that fall into those 2 buckets going forward. So might we, and whether this is a funding cycle or a funding cycle light or a funding cycle pro forma or an RFI type thing rather than an RFP type thing, have funding cycle 2A and 2B. And 2A would be for borrowers who expect to need funds within, and I'll just pick a number, 2 years. And another bucket for borrowers who would not need funds for more than 2 years. And that way, we at least could structure something that would scratch our itch on both of these two issues that we had on the previous slide. What do we do with the current funding cycle? How much should we fund? What are our options as far as getting that fund to begin to revolve? And 2 years is just something off the top of my head that we could fund the 90 million that we have, and that would happen fairly soon, and we would be then in a position to consider leveraging that for some additional amount of money that could be applied to funding cycle 2A almost immediately within the next 2 years. In my mind, if 2 years is reliable, and we'd have to vet that in the applications, that could be revolved again for the next one. For 2B, that would be the 2028 or 2029 cycle. But that sorting into 2A and 2B could be preceded by an RFI type of thing. Who would be interested in something like this? And what's your timing and what's your amount? And then we could fine tune what 2A and 2B looked like and turn it into an actual funding cycle. So it doesn't make sense, I mentioned a moment ago, it doesn't make sense to me to obligate funds that we have, whether it's out of the original 90 million or the leveraged 90 million that we revolve out of the first 90 million, to obligate that more than a little while in advance. Nor does it make any sense to me, and I think other committee and board members, to let funding that we have or have available to us to sit and not be obligated to somebody. So it's my thought process on this whole thing was let's not go one funding cycle at a time. Let's look a couple out that takes into account all the information that we have already, which gets back to Harquahela and similar things, and New Bartlett Dam and similar types of things, and other folks, I think, that aren't one of those two could fit themselves into one category or another. So let's let that idea stew for just a minute.
You do have Pete with his hand up. I want to make a quick comment that I think is relative to, or relates to both of the questions or comments that have just been made as well. I do want to remind the committee of what our application cycle looks like. So Ted, to your point about kind of an RFI, Pete, to your point about something that's a little bit faster. Part of the reason that I think borrowers felt like the timeline was so compressed for this initial application is that they had to have both of our two-step application processes completed. So you remember, it's a two-step application where the initial application is pretty simple. I won't speak to what authorization looks like for various water providers, but it doesn't require commitment to anything. It doesn't require debt authorization just to submit that first step of the application. We had more than two of those actually that came in. It was getting the second half of the application, the finance portion, where you do have to show debt authorization and you do have to get your numbers together, and there is a significant amount of paperwork. It was that step that was more difficult, and that we couldn't quite get all of our applicants in on time. So I think we've kind of built in that initial scoping to the application process that we have, which is not to say we couldn't do something even more kind of high level. There's value, I think, in the work that an applicant does have to do to get that application in, that it is more of a commitment than just to sort of say, well, yeah, if all things held equal, of course I would want to come in for money for something like this. Having a little bit of commitment, a little bit of skin in the game might be helpful, but we do sort of have that built into our processes already. So I'll mention that just to see if that changes the calculation or changes the narrative at all, but I think this has been very helpful so far. So, Mr. Chairman, I'll give it back to you.
Any other thoughts?
My sense was that many of the applicants, their holdup wasn't necessarily the application, it was the timing of the need. Is that right? So if we do it like Chairman Cook is proposing and push it out a little bit? What are your needs in 2-4 years? Does that, do we think we get more people interested?
I don't know that it's an issue of more. I think it may give people a better venue to express that interest. The conversations we were having with potential borrowers, it really was the timing of the application deadlines and less the timing of the need. They were coming to us with, yes, things that were shorter term, and I think they were excited to get that funded because it's shorter term and there was some priority, there was some urgency there. But they were also talking about longer term projects. So I think it was more of the administrative side and less of the, I don't have a need for this infrastructure yet. A lot of that was defined. It just was sort of a, this doesn't work within my structures of governmental, how I get this approval, how I get this submitted.
Okay.
And Ben, I mean, you were in a lot of those conversations too. Would you agree with that assessment?
So there might be then a way for us to consider that rather than, and I'm not abandoning this, but rather than have these two buckets, but the buckets being defined by the applications that we already have, and everybody else gets to pick one of those two, have some type of more of a continuum. And remember the mechanism that we used in the other funds, like the SRFs and like the Water Supply Development Fund, where we've got a priority list and we also have a fundable range. To me, the fundable range kind of matches 2A, and the priority list includes both 2A and 2B. And we may have application deadlines, and currently it's a two-step process. There's the initial application, and then there's a financial assistance application that comes. Those may have different deadlines depending on where you fall in that continuum. I'm not suggesting that we have a custom list where everybody's got their own deadlines according to their own project, and they're constantly happening all of the time. But something like that could work too. That if we have stages, and you can conceivably have more than two. It's just that two is easy to define because we already have, we believe, applicants that are going to come in those timeframes. But if the real holdup is they just can't move that quickly, and it's unreasonable for us to require folks who don't need money for 3 or 4 years to move that quickly, then maybe we need a near-term program and a farther out type of program with different sets of deadlines for certain type of information, so that it will take longer, but it's probably going to be of higher quality information when it's closer to when the need actually exists.
Keith does still have his hand up.
Pete, just leave it up.
Pete, you're muted
Kim?
if you're talking.
Pardon me. Can you hear me now?
You can.
Yes.
Awesome. It seems like there's really kind of two questions floating around here. One is a question of market demand and market shape so that we can define how much we're going to revolve and what that is. And that's kind of Denise's question to kind of get into the model of what does this thing look like and how much do we revolve. And then the second question is around the the actual structure of the program, short-term versus long-term needs. For what it's worth, I definitely agree that we shouldn't like tie up money for 5 years just to sit there. At the end of the day, we've got a certain amount of dry powder, and it is, I guess, the goal of this entire program to make sure that it is deployed efficiently and well, which includes how fast it goes out. For what it's worth, I do think that a short-term and a long-term distinction is good. I also think that it sounds like we already have this quote-unquote survey mechanism in the form of the initial indication of interest versus the full-blown application, which includes financials and approvals and all those things. I guess my first question would be to Denise, like, did you get a hold of all of those additional? It sounded like there was only 2 that made it across with the full package, but another 9 to 11 or whatever that number was more. and was that information available for you in order to like, potentially get more information to pick some of those model parameters as you were trying to like figure out what made sense? Or did that get lost in the noise? I definitely can see how like, it's like, ooh, we didn't have those, but maybe we should have. So those are my general comments. I think though that it would be cleaner just to kind of understand both of those things um, in isolation from one another. One is about like what's the market look like? How do we get more of that information? The other one is going to be about how do we actually like kind of get these the program design in place. And those are separate but related questions.
So to answer the first question, I think we really only had one other application out there where we didn't receive the second piece. However, I'm not sure, since we had the timing of the second piece out there, I don't know if that might have deterred some of them from actually even applying with the first part of that application. So I think there is a population out there that we have not seen yet. So I think going back out would definitely help us gather that information. I also really like the idea of timing that Mr. Cook is talking about. I think there is a financial model that we could build based on short-term needs versus long-term needs. And we could bring some options to the committee on how that would actually work. But again, we need some numbers and some things and things that I can model off of to bring that information to the committee. I will also tell you that when we did design that part one of the application, it was for the purpose of us doing these financial models. Yep. So we did ask for all the information that we need to do at least some initial modeling and then designing a loan program that makes this a very win-win situation for all applicants.
Thank you. So Denise, as you were answering Pete's most recent question, it occurred to me that, and maybe this is where we're heading, we may need to consider initiating a funding cycle that does not have a second deadline defined. And that could actually be, well, I think what we're talking about, at least in my mind, of a financial assistance cycle initiation light or a information gathering process where, let's just say, we were to announce that we're going to initiate a financial assistance cycle number 2. It doesn't have to start in March 17th or 18th. I guess today's the 18th. It could be April 1st for all things, and all that we are asking for is information. Now, the information that we ask for may look different than what we've asked for in the past, and it may focus on some of these things like time of need and so on and so forth. And then after we receive that information, we can do our triage or biage, as it is, into a couple of buckets, if that's still what makes sense to us, and then make a decision about, okay, now from those who are in the near-term bucket, let's just use that terminology, establish when the second deadline is going to be. And maybe one of the questions from the first application is, how long would you need to provide this information, and list what it is that we'll be asking them for later. And then not have to, and then everybody who doesn't fit into that near-term period, then we would not initiate what I've been calling 2B until later, because we don't need to yet. So that might be an approach for us to kind of bifurcate the applications and just do the first step before we even consider when the second step is going to be. And that, to me, if I was an applicant and I was scared away by having that second thing that I'm going to have to do, there's no way I can ever do it, so I'm not even going to try. Well, if all we do is have this initial application and there's no subsequent deadline for them, at least not yet, and they would always, if we do consider a two-step or 2A and 2B type of thing, if it's moving too fast or they can't do it, they always have the option of moving out into the one after that. if so. So this is something that I would like to explore. And while we're thinking about that, and I'll take questions on that in just a minute, let's recall that before we got to this question, there was the other question of what do we do in financial cycle number 1? So we do need to get back to that sometime this morning, because that's what gets the whole ball rolling here. So did you?
Yeah, I think committing to something down the road, I don't think it's a good business decision when you can actually use it and use your revolving fund and do some leveraging to get to there. The other thing is, I never heard of a step 0 before till I got to this committee. And maybe a step 0 would be one that would gather information for those breakdowns of those, because if for some reason people aren't applying for step 1, whatever that might be, maybe because they're scared of step 2, like you're saying here. So maybe a step 0 is to gather their information to be able to get the information that you need to develop where you end up in step 2. Not so much step 1, but it's funny that you only had 3 for step 1, and I know there's got to be a lot of them out there, but there must be something in step 1 that creates some kind of a commitment to scare them away from step 2. I don't know, but maybe step 0 is one that's just more of a gathering of information, and then you have that information to go back to them if we have the money to be able to revolve with them. So.
And maybe step one by itself and not connected to step 2 becomes a step 0.
Yeah,
Because
could
we
be.
really don't
Could be.
know what's scaring people away,
yeah.
if that's really what has
I
happened.
just thought step 0 is interesting, so
It's a nice label and it would get people's attention, so maybe that's what we do.
I do want to point out too, I don't know how much of this was truly being scared away by an application deadline and a commitment, and how much of it was the fact that we opened it in mid-November and it was due before Christmas, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it could have
I'm sure
just
a lot
been
of it was.
logistics, right? And that kind of thing. So I think what you're talking about and the pathway that you're going down in terms of utilizing our existing structure to a great extent, and I'm thinking about this sort of step 0 without needing to call it that necessarily, but bifurcating then, do you need cash today, or do you need cash in 3 months? Or do you need cash in 3 years, right? And being able to take applications, understand that need, and then treat those applicants differently. If you need the cash in 18 months, we can tell you what your due date is for that second application. If you don't need cash in 18 months, then we don't need to tell you, or that due date could be 3 years from now, whatever it might be, in order to just better accommodate the variety of needs that might be out there.
And if we do the 2-step funding cycle, 2-step meaning not bucket A and bucket B,
Right.
but the initial application and the subsequent application, we don't even need to define deadlines other than when the first step is due back. As far as to will they be 2 years or not, let's look at what the data is and we will find a place to divide it.
Our rules do require, or is it policy? Rules, policy, what am I looking at? They do require that we identify the due date for submittal of applications.
Well, that's
So
not what I'm
I
saying.
want to be cognizant of that, but.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is we don't need necessarily to establish that if there's a cycle 2A and a cycle 2B and a cycle 2C, or whatever you want to call them, 2, 3, and 4, that we don't necessarily have to define what the period of those are yet. We in our first step 1 or step 0, whatever we're calling it, when we're getting the applications in, people's expression of interest, ask them, when do you think that you're going to need their money? And hopefully the data will help us and not be some uniform distribution, but actually appear in some kind of lumps that we can then say, okay, we're therefore, based on what we have, we are going to establish these number of buckets with these time frames established with them. And at least for the first one, here's what the due date is going to be for the financial assistance application. But with respect to the first deadline, when on the initial funding cycle, when we started that in November and we had an initial due date of December, January, or whenever that was, we had $90 million sitting there waiting to be lent. We don't have that now. It's going to take some time and we still have some unanswered questions, but it will take some time for that to be revolved so that we will have another supply of money. That probably will be at the earliest this summer. So we don't have to have a 6-week
Right.
application deadline. We don't want it to be so long that people lose interest, or they say, hurrah, right away when we announce whatever we're going to announce, hurrah, let's go do this, but we don't really have to turn it in until August or September. So, and then they get distracted by something else. It needs to be soon enough that they'll respond, but not so far out that it's another meaningless thing on the future horizon. So what I'm thinking that we might do here, with respect to question number 2, which was potential future funding cycles, is ask the staff to go and analyze the discussion that we've had today and make a suggestion to this committee. In my report to the board a couple hours ago, I mentioned to them that we wanted to have this meeting today and come back to them in April with 2 things. A recommendation on the disposition of funding cycle number 1, and number 2, our thoughts on what future funding cycles might not look at. Well, there's no reason in my mind that we have to have a definitive answer on that in April, as long as we get number 1 done. And we'll come back to that momentarily. That if we want to have another committee meeting, and we will have one after the April board meeting, in addition to our April 1st-ish and April 9th-ish meeting, to further discuss this so that the committee can do the work that the committee is here to do, have a good discussion like we did today, send the staff off to refine that, discuss it again at our April committee meeting as part of that agenda, and maybe come back to our board with part 2 of those 2 things in May or June, which is still before we've even begun to be able to revolve the fund and have more money to actually lend. Anybody have any comments on that, or think for some reason that would not work? Right. I don't think that we need a committee vote or motion or anything like that to instruct the staff to bring some suggestions back to us.
Yeah, I think that's true, but I think Denise, did you have
Part
comments
2.
on timing?
I just a thought, we've seen applications for basically 2 projects. One of those projects is fairly quick, so I would just ask the committee to take that in consideration.
Yeah, and
We do have a bunch that may want money in July, in other words. And we can design a program around that, but we would need to have part A and B for those before we move forward with that.
Okay, I'm getting lost in the nomenclature. So part A and B means the 2 questions as far as
The
disposition of
applications,
the
right.
funds from the
Right.
first funding cycle.
right,
Okay.
yeah.
Would May be too late?
Let us think about that,
Okay.
because like you said, we're coming back to you on April 1st and April 9th, and there's nothing that says we can't talk about this in addition to task order outlines. So
That's right.
we should have plenty of opportunity to bring something else to you for consideration even before the April board meeting.
Director, one question of clarification. When you say would may be too late, is that the deadline, proposed deadline, or proposed opening?
I interpreted that as May for the discussion for the board to open that.
Got it.
But
There
wanna
is, just one
be
thing to
clear on
note,
that.
there is a 30-day requirement to leave the application open, so.
Yep.
Factor that into your decisions.
All right, but what Chelsea is holding out for us is that because this committee has to meet on April 1st and April 9th, or around those times, it is possible for us to have feedback from the staff and still bring both of those items to the board, both the disposition of funding cycle 1 and the conceptual design of funding cycle number 2, to them for approval in the April board meeting. That wouldn't hold up folks that maybe want to fast track and get some funding by midsummer.
Feel good about that?
Okay.
Feel good about that?
So and again, Joe, I don't think that we need to have any kind of motion to direct staff.
No, the whole point of the discussion is to put that on the record. I think your request to have staff analyze that and bring options to you is consistent without, with not requiring a motion.
And it was a good discussion. This is why, personally, and it's not just because I'm the chair of the committee, but this is why I like the committee to have these discussions, because we have a dedicated time. We can talk for a couple hours about it if we need to. We're not doing that today. But rather than try and shove it into a board agenda item. So back to our first question, which is disposition of funding from the first funding cycle. So, unless anybody wants to talk more about this second question. Okay, so let's move back to the first question. We have $90 million of funding available. We received the 2 applications from Queen Creek and from Surprise that we're all familiar with. And we have an infinite number of possible ways that we could use. All are part of our $90 million. And I've got my own ideas, but I will entertain some ideas from the committee about what we ought to do.
So I will just kind of, again, can you go back to the, yeah, thank you, Ben. So again, state of play is that this committee has voted on a ranking for the applications. And I think that it's important to note that all of the conversation we've had up to this point assumes something. And that assumption is that we awarded the first application on this ranking. Because if you do not award the Queen Creek application for the full $90 million that we have available to award, there is nothing against which to borrow. There is nothing that revolves, right? So maybe we've kind of been skirting around that issue, but every conversation we've had assumes that that is what this committee would recommend to the board in April. So staff is absolutely prepared to agendize that, but if there is additional discussion from the committee that we need to know before that happens, obviously this is a good time for us to have that discussion. And Pete's got his
I
hand
see
raised.
that Pete has raised his hand.
So I don't know how to, and let me double check that my mic is on this time.
Yep, you're good.
Last time when we met at the board level, the forecasts and the prognostications around what was going to happen on the Colorado River were sobering. 27 to 77%, who knows where it's going to end up, but whatever it is, it's going to be a lot. And I'm wondering, we've got 90 some odd, we've got a lot of money here. And I'm wondering, does it make sense to do we need to even just think about, is the right thing to do with the money to invest in long-term infrastructure when we got short-term problems? I don't even know if that's allowed underneath the sort of structures that we've got here right now, but I'm just trying to ask the common sense question, right? We're staring down the barrel of some fairly large and immediate cuts on the Colorado River, and we've got a bucket of money, haha, and I wonder if there is a higher, better, more immediate use of these funds. I don't know if that's allowed. I don't know if that's kosher. I just know that from a common sense perspective, right, you tackle the big problems and the most immediate problems first. So that's the question that I have. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will start, but I think I probably need Joe and Chelsea to weigh in here. So, and all the committee members know this, that the 90 million that we're referring to here falls in the category of the up to 25% of the funding that is available to the long-term water augmentation fund, which implies that, and the other piece of that is at least 75% for the water importation projects. So the only other thing statutorily that we would be allowed to do with this $90 million of funding that we have earmarked for the in-state program would be not to use it for the in-state program and somehow put it over on the water importation project side of the ledger. At this moment in time, even though those projects are going to be expensive and we are going to need relatively huge amounts of loans and or equity at some point in time. That time is not now. And so to me, this devolves back to let the 90 million just sit there for some future use rather than deploy it right now.
Tim has his hand up as well.
Tim has his hand up, and then Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following up on Pete's comment about things that may not be kosher, may not be allowed, but why don't we ask those questions? In the in-state realm of things, there's probably a number of things that could be done that could be of a high priority to get Arizona interest through the next 2 to 3 years of stress on the Colorado River. What those things are, I won't enumerate here, but we all know, and we have had recent presentations on the status of discussions on the Colorado River. We all know that money will be a part of how Arizona navigates the next 2 to 3 years of Colorado River water supply. We all know that there are in-state water resources that could possibly be mobilized from willing sellers to willing buyers. That could be really a near-term, immediate move the money and move the water type things. I don't know if they're kosher. I don't know if they're allowable uses of this fund, and I don't know that we're ready to lay that out on the table. But I'm very, very intrigued by Pete's comments about we got 90 million. How do we best use it now to solve problems now while we resolve the long-term and more generational uses of money and solutions? This might not be very helpful commentary, but I'm very interested in that conversation if it's allowed to be had. And I think that's a conversation where we would have to work with our friends over at ADWR to see, does 90 million move a needle somehow intrastate on that whole discussion? So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Chair.
Thank you. It may be that, and thank you, Tim, for illuminating that particular item on the list of things that to answer the question, what does Arizona do between a potential severe cut on the Colorado River and the time in which WIFA type augmentation projects come online? What do we do for that 2 through 10-year period of time as those projects come? Well, on that list of things, and I won't go through the whole list, is what Tim referred to, which is willing buyer, willing seller to move whatever water is left in Arizona from folks who don't get cut to folks who do. To paraphrase Tim, I'm not putting words in your mouth. So I'll just ask this question rather than make a statement. Is it possible that some of those type of transactions might be able to be funded as an in-state water augmentation project? I don't know what the answer to that question is. Or do we need to do something different in order to say, hey, we have $90 million and we're going to, I'm trying not to sound skeptical. And WIFA wants to find a way to make that available to fund water relocation transactions within the state of Arizona. Or could that be part of what we've been talking about for the last half hour as far as water augmentation in-state projects? I don't know. Is moving water and augmentation? Probably not. So maybe I've answered my own question.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Davis.
I think it's good conversation, good questions, and worth having. I think I just want to point out that in my mind, the Harquahala was always meant to be a bridge, and a bridge between now and when we need new augmentation, importation projects. Now, it does seem like that chasm that we have to bridge is much shorter now all of a sudden than maybe we contemplated even a year ago, or 2 years ago, or 3 years. But, so I understand sort of the questioning is there bigger bang for the buck because we got a problem right now? But I just want to point out, I think there's still utility in building the infrastructure, even if it's one application right now. I think there's still utility, a broader benefit to building the infrastructure around Harquahala that could potentially be broader than just the one applicant. So I guess I'm just bringing that up, and I'm thinking through all this, so I don't have the answers, but I'm just saying I don't want to pull back from a project because we want to make sure we get the big, when we're not seeing the full benefits of that project, because I think they're broader than just helping one community, if that makes sense.
And that project is a water augmentation project.
Right.
It's only for one location. But that's what it is. And if we can revolve this fund a couple of times in the next 5 years, it could be broader than that. And that would be something that I think that I would put up on the scoreboard as far as potential uses for the 90 million is funding water transfers doesn't get revolved.
There's water revolving benefits, but I also think building actual infrastructure in Harquahala, showing how that can be done, there's benefit there that others might be able to benefit from, if that makes sense too. So Queen Creek or whatever may be first, but others see how that is done and they might be able to, utilize that down the road too.
Okay, good point.
Pete's hands up.
Pete, please.
This is a fun conversation. So, rather than get down into specific projects, Harquahala or any others, right? I'd like to just understand the answer to the fundamental question: what can we do with this stuff, right? And so, to me, that comes before the debate on any particular use, right? I'd like to understand the general categories of use first. And so, because I do think that there has been a change in the urgency of these things. And, there was a time when, these types of decisions were made, and perhaps the world has completely changed since that day and today. And so I'm just looking to look at the end of the day, I want to do what makes sense for the people of Arizona, and we all do with these funds, right? And so if there is a fire to put out right now, then perhaps we should explore doing and addressing the immediate need as opposed to the long-term need. And if we see that there is an immediate need, then perhaps we can get the rules changed or whatever. I don't know. But I just was really struck by the fact that there's some urgent needs right now. And as other people have said, it's going to take some money to fix, and we've got some. So before we start talking about this project or that project, I just want to know, what are we allowed to do? Thank you.
So I can take a start at that and then allow the committee to continue, and then have Joe come in as well. So remember that the definition of what the long-term water augmentation fund can do is not limited temporally. It is honestly not really limited geographically. We do water supply development projects. That is what can be funded through the long-term water augmentation fund. Part of the reason this board is set up the way that it is, and part of the reason that mandate is so broad, is that it allows you to make those kinds of judgment calls about what kind of water supply development projects you want to fund based on the benefits of the project and based on the financial capacity of the organization. I think what we are hearing is that, putting aside specific projects now, what we want is the flexibility to fund things that are important, that are immediate, that have short-term benefits that we need to have right now. we don't have to choose between those two things, right? This is not an either or of we can either fund longer term things that are going to take a long time, or we can fund short term things. We've been saying that for a while. I think that's why we opened the in-state part. We've been using in-state and short term synonymously. That might not always be the case, and I think we had that discussion earlier today. But there is flexibility for what we want to fund and when we want to fund that. And what we're more limited by is not our statutory authority and the definition of water supply development project. What we are more limited by are what are the available projects that have come to the door asking us to fund them now. And again, I want to go back to the idea that this is not an either or. We can do both, but we can only do both. We can only do more with our money if we put it to work more quickly. And so that is why we're looking at this specific project, because it's the one in the door in front of us right now. And unless we put the money to work, unless we invest it in order to start turning it into more money, we do limit ourselves more than if we do not make that investment. Queen Creek enables multiple iterations of their same kind of project after. And I think I would also say too, this is project specific. It is not more general. But I think what we heard from the applicant in last month's meeting was that in terms of, what is the fire that they need to put out right now? What is that short-term immediate need? I think we heard that this is that short-term immediate need, that they really are looking at this as their bridge, to use your term, Director Davis, to what the next big project is. So
To that point, I'm not 100% confident in this, so that's why I'm very grateful for this conversation. But to that point, this just may be the most urgent thing that we can invest in, based off of the urgency that's in front of us, to actually build something concrete that's different than what is currently providing people with water. I mean, namely, folks get their water sources from just a handful of places right now: CAP, SRP, groundwater. And this may at least be something, diversify that a little bit. I mean, it is groundwater, but it's a bridge water. But, I think it's a good conversation, but I just don't want us to say, well, we got urgent needs, so this may be the answer to that urgent need, I guess. Mm-hmm.
Please.
My comments on this, I appreciate what Pete says, because there's a lot of crap going on out there, and we have no idea. In business, you used to be able to project 5 years down the road of everything. You can't project 2 months down the road now. So us trying to project what's going to come is going to be difficult. But the thing is, getting this money out, and I think you hit on it, Chelsea, is get this money out there and get it going to work for us. So the opportunity to leverage it and do other projects down the road, I think is real important. So I think the sooner we get this out to Queen Creek, the sooner we can start making some things happen, and then watch out for the stuff that's coming. And I think Pete is right. We got some serious things coming up. Hopefully not, but we're all pretty sure it's going to happen. And so, I'm all for getting this out there right away and get some money back.
Treese, please.
Yeah, thank you. And this has been a very, very interesting discussion, and I've really appreciated hearing from all of you on it. And I have had some real concerns as well about just the uncertainties here in Arizona with regards to the Colorado River discussions. And that still is uncertain, maybe even more uncertain than even yesterday. And so I don't know what the future is going to bring. And I do know that when these projects came forward, when they were vetted, I've had some concerns about surprise. I will let you know, because it's so long term and because they've already changed from 22 to 44 million, although I know it means more water availability, but I have concerns about surprise. On the other hand, with Queen Creek, this is something that is a water supply development project that fits exactly with what we were trying to do with these funds. It has benefits. We've got the need, and they need it now. So I agree also. I think we need to get the money out there, and that's why we created this fund. And I would like to see us move forward. So I am in agreement with moving forward with Queen Creek. I do have some concerns about Surprise.
Any other comments, questions from committee members? Okay, in a moment, I'm going to ask for a motion. I really appreciate the conversation that we've had and all the back and forth and the creativeness, and the willingness to explore maybe unconventional ways of thinking, even conventional for us at least. But I also am cognizant of the discussion that we had at the board meeting earlier this morning about folks, whoever they may be, coming in and taking funding off the top to use for another purpose. And I think that is not our role to do that necessarily. I don't want to be one of those agencies that does that, or one of those decision-making groups that does something like that. However, I think there's lots of merit in some of what we discussed here, and I would like us to keep an open mind with respect to the use of the funds that we have, particularly in this in-state augmentation program. At some point, maybe we've been discussing revolving that sometime even this year, possibly, and that would give us some time to kind of have both, have our cake and eat it too, where we don't have to pause and get some of those questions answered as far as what we're able to do, and do we need to get the rules changed. And so in the meantime, our 90 million just sits there. We believe that we can turn that rather quickly, but not so quick that we won't be able to get some of these other questions answered and have the possibility to have this discussion again with maybe some additional input and research from the WIFA staff about the possibilities going forward. So with that kind of set up for that, I would entertain a motion on whether or not to recommend to the board an award to either of the projects that we have ranked previously for this initial funding cycle. A couple of you are real close to that.
Mr. Chairman, this is Drew John. I make the motion we approve Queen Creek to actually recommend Queen Creek to the board to approve.
Do you have an amount attached to that?
90 million?
Okay. So we have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Davis seconds. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, we'll move to a vote. All in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
This
Can I
is,
explain my vote?
Yes,
Oh.
yes, let's go one at a time.
Yeah,
Yes,
vote roll
please.
call.
Let's do a roll call vote then, please.
Sorry, I'm gonna use your
Yeah,
attendance if that's okay.
I'll just
Sorry
go to the
about that.
first page and
Right.
do that. Okay, so we'll do a roll call vote
Okay.
in alphabetical order here. Mr. Davis,
Aye.
Ms. Horstman,
Aye.
and if you want to explain your vote, please do so.
I think I did with my earlier comments on
Okay.
Queen Creek. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Kim,
Aye, and I'll explain my vote. I think that it's really interesting right now, what we are doing with this, and I want to bring this forward to the larger board to have the debate. And so basically I'm reserving my right to switch my vote on this one, but I do want to have the bigger debate around this. And I also want to have the time for staff to go and find this stuff. But I do think that this is a mechanism to kind of entertain the question at the larger board level. I do think that the fundamental part of my question is not, does Queen Creek have a great project? I'm sure they do. And, we've kind of studied the heck out of it. It's really like, in the wake of recent developments surrounding the immediacy of cuts and the size of those cuts. Is this the largest, best use of those funds at this particular time, or has that changed? I want that debate at the larger board level, which is why I'm forwarding it here. And so, with that in mind, I vote aye.
Mr. John,
Aye.
Mr. Tom Muir,
Explain my vote. I think Pete said almost word for word where I land on this. I have concerns about it, but I would like to see that play out at the board level. So I will vote aye.
and I vote aye. So we have a unanimous vote with those caveats that we heard from a couple of folks. And I don't think anyone would object to continuing this conversation at the board level. So the motion passes for Queen Creek, $90 million. I believe we have completed agenda item number 4 with that.
Not yet, I have a couple more slides.
Okay.
I do want to
Oh,
talk
no, we
specifically
wouldn't- yeah.
about the Bartlett project, and I'll do this quickly because I think we've touched on a few of the considerations that we will talk about for this, but the committee had expressed concerns both last month and just a few minutes ago about the timing on the Bartlett project, right? It wasn't that the surprise application was one that did not have merit, but the question was, do we want to tie up funding right now when we could be putting that funding to higher and better use, or at least more immediate and better use? There isn't really a way for us to obligate money to a borrower, but to say we're going to technically obligate it, but not for another 3 years, right? We have to actually say yes or say no. And one of the thoughts that staff had as well was, is the long-term augmentation fund the only source of financing that WIFA could put to use for a project like the Bartlett project, or actually I will say specifically for the Verde River Sediment Mitigation Project? So we looked at the SRF funds, our federal funds, and said, is there any way for us to utilize these? Typically, dam expansion is not going to be something that EPA is going to pay for. That's pretty much a non-starter in the SRFs. However, there are certain deviations from that policy that include water rights deviations. So if the project is for the purpose of water rights resiliency, as well as the ability to go out and ask for project-specific deviations if that kind of infrastructure is being built to further the purposes of the state revolving funds. We think this is a project that is a very good applicant or a very good candidate for one of those kinds of deviations. So our thought was to approach the committee with the idea of opening a cycle specific to the Verde River Sediment Mitigation Project, specific to the Bartlett project, have a very long application window to reflect that project's timing. Also understand that the application may be flexible and that we may be able to bring in funding from other sources to either braid into additional long-term augmentation fund money or to have sort of these separate parallel paths. But let us, again, similar to what we've talked about on the previous item, gauge demand for the funding, because we don't know yet. We know that there are a number of non-federal partners that are interested in this. We don't know that all of them would want to come to WIFA for funding. If they did, we don't know what the extent of that funding demand would ask, but at least allow us to gauge that, determine whether WIFA wants to wade into this project, whether we want to create sort of a specific programmatic intentional funding cycle for this project. And to your point earlier about, or last month about surprise and wanting to ensure that we're rewarding them for coming in early, that we are recognizing that they were innovative and willing to stick their neck out. In the prioritization criteria that this board, this committee develops for this kind of specific, project-specific cycle, you can prioritize, elevate applicants that have previously applied for assistance. So that would still put surprise at the front of the line if you chose to do that. I think, again, this is another one that we can come back to you with more information as we have it, including information about whether it is feasible to find funding through the SRFs, but we wanted to at least throw it out to the committee for consideration whether this is something you would want us to pursue a cycle specific to the Bartlett Dam Expansion Project.
Thank you for that. And I know you have one more slide.
No,
so
this
we're
is it. You're
Oh,
good.
this is it.
Yep.
Okay.
We're
So I think that the creativity of exploring how to use the SRF funding if possible, and the longer application window. Some of these, so with the exception of the SRF inclusion here, many of these bullets are things that we discussed earlier today.
Yep.
And your slide really should have said possible financial assistance cycle 2B.
Exactly.
So I'm not trying,
Yep.
I'm not trying to diminish this, and I swear I did not see this ahead of time. So, but it just shows that thinking about these kind of things can lead to maybe unexpected outcomes. So please incorporate all of these into the earlier assignment that you got from the committee to look at these type of things, including the participation by the SRFs, if that makes sense, and whether or not we might have a funding cycle or a piece of a funding cycle specifically dedicated to just the Bartlett Dam would rely upon what we might get in our funding cycle initiation with only a deadline for the initial application. As far as, and I'm glad you brought it up because we really kind of left that dangling here. What consideration, if any, does Surprise have as an applicant in the first round? They didn't get any money, but did they get some kind of special consideration or not? Well, we discussed earlier about the tools that we use in some of the other funding or funds with respect to, there's a project priority list and then there's a fundable range. So we can consider in whatever recommendations that the staff makes to the committee, that do we, this is a strong word, guarantee or offer to give Surprise number one on the project priority list just because of that. There's only going to be one number one on that list. So you can address all of these things in your recommendations to the committee. And thank you for insisting that we keep the discussion going until you were done. Mr. Drew.
Yeah, I have a comment. I feel for Surprise because projects like this with all the permitting and everything that goes on with this, it's gonna be such a long project and probably not cheap project as we can see. And so that they're, I can see where they have to start out way back and give themselves plenty of time to go through all of this to get it done. And it would be nice to be able to commit but not commit.
Right.
To help these guys out, because if they can't get the money lined up to be able to complete this project, it's going to be very difficult for them to proceed to their step 2 or their step 3. And so I feel for them, but it's just too bad. It would be nice to develop some other kind of mechanism like Ted's talking about to give them some kind of ease to go ahead and proceed and be able to start working on these things. And of course, they're getting money from other people to be able to pull this thing off, quite a few other people, I'm sure. But they're going to need some help, and that's just my thoughts on it. I feel for them, and like I say, if we could commit without committing, it'd be great.
And Pete has his hand up.
Again, it's me. Sorry. I just want to echo that comment. It is, as we were talking about some of the dynamics of sort of short-term versus long-term needs. It occurred to me that we're almost penalizing people for being organized and forward thinking. You know what I mean? And far be it from me to actually say that that's what we're trying to do, right? I really appreciate it when people actually are organized and buttoned up and tell us years ahead of time that this stuff's coming, and we should celebrate that and we should encourage that, right? I don't know exactly how to do that, right? To commit without committing, as Mr. John said, but I would love a mechanism like that, because otherwise all we're doing is we're telling people, yes, apply so we can get your information, and then we'll say sort of no. That doesn't feel right either, right? So if we could figure out a graceful and elegant way to sort of do that, that'd be great. I'm sure somebody has figured this out, so I would because this can't be a new problem, so if we could figure out what other folks have done in this regard and just straight up copy it, that'd be great. That's the end of my comments. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions related to agenda item number 4? Okay. We'll move on to agenda item number 5, call to the public. This is the time for any additional public comments. They will be limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any public comments?
Mr. Chair, we have one request to speak from Guy Conte. Guy, I will unmute you. You can go ahead. Guy, go ahead.
Guy, your microphone's been enabled, but you'll have to unmute yourself.
Am I muted now?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to thank everybody on WIFA and the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee for all the hard work you're doing for everyone in the state of Arizona. You play a major role in supporting our continued growth. I drove up to Vistancia Trilogy from Scottsdale the other day on the 303, and I saw the expanse of land and see that will be under development over time. And to me, I'm just glad to see you guys working on these great in-state projects. My question has to do with the water importation projects that were approved for consideration on November 19th. And tomorrow is 4 months to the day from November 19th. And I'd like to get a big picture on the Gulf of California desal project, Bengate project that's supposed to deliver 150,000 acre feet by 2034, the Pacific Bengate for 50,000 to 200,000 acre feet, and the EPCOR project in Puerto Penasco. And also, it said during the press release that public participation, extensive public input engagement are planned for early spring 26. But we're in early spring, and will there be communication so that we know when we can go to meetings and participate? So I'd like a big picture and a sense for what the roadmap is for these major desal projects that are between states and between countries.
Thank you very much for those comments. I will refer you back to some prior board meetings for discussion on those topics. I will also refer you back to the earlier slides today that had that flow chart for the approval of the task orders. That will be the first opportunity for extensive public comment, and we actually do have the opportunities for public input noted specifically on that flow chart. So also keep a lookout for the next 3 long-term augmentation committee meetings that we talked about earlier. That'll be your first look at the initial.
The first, 9th, and 14th or so? 15th?
That is correct. So that'll be your first opportunity for your initial view at the task orders that are going to go out to these teams, as well as your idea for the timeline and when you'll be able to respond to specific deliverables.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe that at the end of the day, if you had your crystal ball, would you be moving forward with one desal project so we could put our foot in the water and test it and get a project under our belt, as opposed to possibly moving forward with one in the Sierra Cortez and one in California?
That's the kind of information that our scoping process is meant to determine. So no crystal ball at this point. I just encourage you to continue paying attention to our meetings.
I've been paying attention religiously. I
We
appreciate all you're doing.
that.
2022 to 2026, we're 4 years into it, and it's going to be another few more years, and we're not going to have any of this water till 2031 at the earliest. So, sense of urgency, and I just appreciate all you're doing, and thank you for listening to my comments. Actually, weren't a comment; there were more questions, but you referred me to those pages, and I will look back at those. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, moving to agenda item number 6, agenda development. So we already have discussed the likelihood to have 3 more committee meetings in April.
Yep.
And then we had also on the board agenda some specific work for this committee to include going forward, specifically with respect to do we make the needs assessment that was discussed at the board meeting, authorized at the board meeting, update some kind of periodic things. So we'll find a way to fit that into one of our upcoming agendas, even if it's not in April, because we've got a lot to do in those 3 meetings. It may have to wait a little longer than that. Does anyone else have any other suggestions for agendas for the Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee? I'm not seeing any raised hands. Okay, we'll move then to, unless you have something else to add. Okay. Agenda item number 7, our next meeting. Well, we just talked about that. Tentatively, Wednesday, April 1st at 9 a.m. We will let you know. And as Chelsea said earlier, Brenda will be reaching out to us to poll availability for that meeting, and I assume also the 9th. Anything else on next meeting? Okay, we'll move to, and we're 5 minutes early. Move to the final agenda item number 8, adjournment. If there's nothing else, we will adjourn this meeting of the WIFA Long-Term Water Augmentation Committee. It is now 11:55 a.m.